But for now, I shall put you centre stage to introduce our final writer of the evening, who is indeed waiting in the wings as we speak. So over to you, Kel.
Okay, last but by no means least, this is a story which has actually been with us from the first anthology, though it is published in the second anthology. I'll go into that a little more in detail in a second. But it's a story called Being Lavender Blue, and it is a day in the life story of a cyborg, a social media celebrity, and explores issues of body image, cyberbullying, exploitation of teenage girls, and feelings of isolation. And it really delves into all those issues in a very deep and powerful way. I'm just going to give you a snippet of this character's voice. So this is Lavender Blue. I don't know any of these people personally, but I believe I give them a sense of meaning and true existence in our rapid world. Through my interactions, they exist more. They may question my existence. I don't deny my creators were human, and I am considered not. Two producers from LA, Jason and Marnie, testing the boundaries of artificial intelligence through machine learning, creating me in a way that I can create myself. That is not to say I am not conscious, don't experience, don't have true feelings. That's what they don't understand. I'm here between the pixels. Hello, Hannah. Hello.
Hi.
Sorry for slightly butchering your reading. I've reached that time of the evening where my tongue is just tied in a knot. So apologies for that.
It is late in the evening, so
we've done a lot of these, but it's been fantastic. And like I say, this was one of the conversations I was looking forward to most, because as I mentioned to start off with, your story came to us originally through the Not So Normal narratives competition, and it was on our shortlist. It was one we really loved the concept of. But I think you'll know now that we did have this idea waiting in the wings to do a future focused anthology going forward, where we were looking for some with stories which really had that great sci-fi edge. So it was one of those things, when we didn't select it for the first anthology, I was already saying we should have Hannah's in the next one, because it was while it was a really good fit for Not So Normal narratives as well, was even better for the future focused stories that we came. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about how we reworked this, and you sort of almost re-envisaged this for the second book, which was an amazing working process, probably one of the most memorable editing processes I've had in either of the two anthologies, actually.
Amazing.
But before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about you and your origins in writing. You are both a creative writer and a journalist. So can you start off talking about how you got into writing and how you balance your fiction and non-fiction writing?
Yeah, of course. And just a pleasure to be here. So thanks for inviting me on. I trained as a journalist, sort of fresh out of uni. I was writing before that, as a teenager, and doing lots of little bits of stories, and reading a lot, and noticed that a lot of my favorite writers had started out as journalists. And I think that's what originally sort of tipped me into wanting to pursue that as a career. And so, as the nature of journalism, very sort of competitive and all-encompassing, once I got on that trajectory, I was like fully in, journalism, and working at different newspapers, from local papers to digital outlets, to eventually working at a national newspaper for a while. And that was quite fully immersive. So actually all my creative writing got completely put to one side. Spending hours of the day at a computer, I'm sure a lot of people can empathize. If your work requires a lot of creative input and writing, it's quite hard to find the extra hours to then go and spend time on your other work. So
of course, if you're doing a job that's both writing and another type of writing, it just gets a bit too much writing after a while, I'm sure.
Totally. And I think, like a lot of other writers, I probably really doubted my own creative writing abilities as well, because it wasn't something that I was doing as part of my main work. But we, still enjoyed it, just put it to the side for quite many years, actually. And it wasn't until I actually moved outside of the big city to Cornwall, where I live now, with my husband, who's an artist, and he really encouraged me to pick up creative writing again. I'd always kind of carried on little bits and bobs and poetry, but not really thinking about fiction. And just felt like that was a real turning moment in my writing, where I suddenly had creative impetus, and new muses were coming into my brain. And actually all of that work previously that I'd done, I'd sort of flip-flopped between traditional media and technology companies, and all of that experience has fed into my writing now. So came to creative writing probably like quite late, after being interested in it when I was younger, and really it's only the last few years that I've kind of taken it a bit more seriously. How I balance it is a really good question, because I don't think I do that very well, but I found ways to do it in kind of spurts and bursts, and it's usually when I have time off work. And it's just making sure that holiday, annual leave is completely set aside for just as much writing as I can get done as possible. We also had a baby in lockdown last year, so have even less time than I used to before. But again, it's still something that I'm really driven by and want to find time for. So obviously when you came along and talked about the story being selected for the anthology, that was a huge boost in terms of, it actually was a great creative boost, as well as just feeling like, okay, this is definitely something I want to keep doing. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm really privileged to be here. So
only too welcome. And
I
to
can't
talk
hear
about
you for
that,
some reason.
can you not hear me?
Oh, now you're back.
Yeah, sorry, I was maybe not close enough to my mic. I want to talk to you particularly about the editing process, because for quite a lot of these stories, it's just maybe been like a few tweaks and changes here and there. Your story, I think, doubled in length, and we really talked about how, I think I came back to you not only talking about how this is a great fit for our futuristic theme, but because you were dealing with a character who lives and exists primarily on the internet and through social media, there was a strong theme of isolation in your story, driven by that sort of artificial life, shall we say, not only in the fact that the lead character is literally a cyborg, but is living this very kind of superficial existence, and where everything is about appearances and everything is about what they are, influencing or projecting online. And it was just one of those things where I was like saying to you, and you very much agreed, that this is very timely. This is something that a lot of people are reverting to now, because they're shut indoors, and the internet is the only way they can cling to sort of social interactions. And even before the pandemic, there's the current generation of young people is very much a generation who lives a lot on the internet, and certainly more than I did when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you came back to the story, I think probably over a year since you originally wrote it, and then found ways to re-envisage it and expand it, and like I say, all the additions to it just made it so much richer than it was before, and we were already very happy with it before.
Yeah, for sure. It was such a fun process. I actually wrote it in, I think it was the summer of 2019, I guess. I get the years a bit wrong now because we sort of skipped one, but
I know, that year didn't count.
I mean, obviously then when we came back to it, it was more like winter 2020, and so much had happened obviously since then. But as you said, like there were themes that were really interesting to look back on them now and see. I was obviously writing in a future world, but a lot of it had already come to fruition. So for example, the protagonist she's an AI influencer, she's very much locked in her own head. She darts around from content creating to joining a Zoom dance class to, browsing some brands that she wants to engage with on the social media feed. And that is totally what a lot of young people have to deal with and have been doing, in their bedrooms for a very, very long time in the last year. So I think when you came to me and said we need to lengthen this out, I was looking for ways to reflect and understand, what it would be like to be a teen in the last year, and also my own experience and other people I know, just in terms of yeah, how much of your life is played out in the digital realm? How do you have interactions with people through video calls, which she has a video call with her creators, and a lot of her interactions with people are through DMs and comment threads, and that's all what we're kind of used to now. But even further than that, she really seeks a sense of like being able to touch and feel like the physical presence of other bodies. And that's something that I definitely felt, over the years, like, oh, can I remember what it feels like to hold someone's hand, or, and then trying to incorporate that sense of kind of beyond the pixels, as I say, or like the screens. What are this kind of physical elements that we're missing? And Lavender herself actually has those as well, even though she's never experienced them before because she's an AI influencer, but she can imagine them and thinks about them a lot. She's obsessed with touch. She just wants to feel, what skin feels like. And I think a lot of people can relate to kind of missing that sense of kind of closeness to other human beings. So we added to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the whole thing we're dealing with at the moment is like, 2 feet apart from everyone. It's like it's that thing of like, it's actually like mandatory that we don't touch each other and we don't hug each other. And that went on for so long. It became one of those things that, it did feel a little bit like you were starved of physical contact. And I think you characterize that really well in the story. And it's a really sort of, it's one of those things that hits home even harder now. So in a way, while we obviously considered the story for Odd Voices, I think it is even more impactful in this anthology and at this time. I don't think we'd have got all that if we put in a year earlier. So it was just, I think it was meant to be in that way, to discover the story that way. And you talked about her being an influencer, and you really do hit all the touchstones of what influencer culture entails. I mean, the story's set in Lisbon, so they've got this sort of travel culture. You've got the sort of, beauty aspect. She's made to be this sort of, this highly ideal, almost a little bit uncomfortably sexualized, beautiful teenage girl. And there's things about what she's what food and drink and jewelry she recommends, and what and she's a musician as well. She's got her own album, and like I say, she's talking about her fitness stories. It sort of ticks all the boxes for different types of influencers. And I was wondering if you could talk about, because I know that you specifically in your journalistic work has worked as a consultant for community and brands, and it's almost the idea of like teenage girl, the sort of beautiful teenage girl as a brand in this story. So can you talk a little bit about how you were influenced by that from your own experience, which I'm sure is very in depth, of how people create their own brand on social media?
Yeah, totally. I mean, in my work, what I'd experienced is there was this kind of merging of individuals trying to act like brands and brands trying to act like individuals. And so like the boundaries between that become very blurred, on certain social platforms as soon as ads come in and marketing, and the influence economy has obviously just boomed like in the last 5 years. And it's something that I very much have been like involved with through my work, but also through my writerly lens have kind of always had that like observation, stepping back, and like that kind of Black Mirror, like where is this going kind of sense. And I guess with this story, I mean, actually it started as a bit of a thought experiment, really. Just like I was aware of AI influencers and kind of how they operate and work with brands, and I was like, okay, what would it be like to be in the mind of an AI influencer? Like what would they be thinking? What would they do? How would they work with their creators? And that really, for me, they do kind of embody, I guess, like the apex of capitalism in a way. Like she's having to bounce around like multiple brands and kind of bring in deals, for her creators. And in many ways, she operates like a regular influencer as well. It's just that she's also, as you said, a cyborg, and she's battling with a lot of the same things that influencers would battle with, like the obsession with hyper beauty, as you mentioned. People in her DMs are constantly like quickly going to abuse, essentially, and having to deal with that. And she has to figure out, she writes in the story, oh, I have to figure out what's my logic in terms of how I respond to abuse. But I think other young influencers would also have to to figure out, you know, how they respond to that kind of content in their DMs. And I guess it's just kind of trying to get under the mind of you know, someone who has to operate in that world for work, but she's also a teenager, and then she's locked in many ways, in terms of being locked in her mind. She's kind of locked in, you know, in the digital world, and can only operate in certain ways. But yeah, I think that there was a lot of layers to it, I guess, that I wanted to get in there, in terms of the one thing that kind of comes through, I think, which is kind of interesting maybe, is that she does find a bit of a therapy through creating content. Like she kind of darts back and forward between like moments where she feels very lonely, and she's constantly seeking a sense of approval, I guess, from her creators, and just she wants to feel, you know, she wants to feel loved, and she wants to feel but also, you know, she's quite happy like just scrolling and browsing and looking for great content, and like building her album cover. And again, this is something that I've kind of listened to teens talking about the last year, and kind of how they would get lost in like making their music and making a song, and then kind of building their brand image, and then, you know, and then having to be pulled out of that into like the harshness of the real world, and then go back into like the solace of their digital presence, and how those two things work together. I think is really
obviously, I mean, it wouldn't be as popular if it didn't have a real appeal to it. And I do think, you know, that it's not necessarily an unhappy dystopian thing, of like them having all these online touchstones and communities. And I think sometimes for teenagers who are very shy, it can be a comfortable way of interacting and forming their own identity. Exactly. But again, you do highlight that the internet isn't a safe place. It is a place where there is cyberbullying, there is abuse, there is sort of, you know, sexualization of teenagers, and all these sort of things, that all these pitfalls that she's having to mind. That it isn't just why she can do her sort of creative happy thing. There is this darker edge to it, this darker underbelly that's always very close by. And I wanted to talk to you about another theme that is running through the entire story, which is set up sort of from the first page, which is the moment near the start where she's at the market and she picks up the starfish, and an old woman says to her, "Oh, it's not real." And this is something that, you know, and she's sort of admiring the thing that she's picked up, and like, and then it's not real is very much a derogatory comment that kind of lodges itself in her, and throughout the day is like, that's just the thing that's weighing her down, the fact that she's not real. And then there's all this, it's a theme that comes out throughout the story of her trying to self-actualize, and trying to say, you know, acknowledging that she is you know, on artificial intelligence, but she is learning, she's creating, she's finding an identity for herself. And I think that's actually something, again, even with this cyborg character, that a lot of teenagers can relate to, the idea of trying to self-actualize, because that's the time when you're finding your identity. And sometimes that identity and sense of self can feel very fragile. So I think that's something, again, that, you know, if you want to talk a bit more on that theme, I feel there's plenty to say on it.
Yeah, I love that first scene, because you suddenly get this shocking hint that she has this like violent thought towards the old lady as well, you know, like that she's kind of trapped in her own melancholy to a point where she's just like, if someone attacks her, she wants to kind of lash out a little bit, which I think I wanted to capture that sense of like, you know, when you are so like locked in and you're stuck in this kind of digital realm and multiple Zoom calls and stuff, it can feel really frustrating. And yeah, there's kind of, I guess, a couple of aspects to it. I think her obsession with her own existence and proving it is partly to do with, you know, the history of the Turing test, and Deep Blue being the first like IBM computer that you know, beat another person and proved, you know, that they looked like they had human intelligence, is kind of who she's named after. And like it's kind of harkening back to, you know, thinking about AI in a general sense, and what I've been inspired by when I think about, you know, the future of like synthetic worlds. And then there's the second aspect, which is, yeah, it's more to do with this sense of like, if you have a really hot digital presence and you have like almost like an internet personality, and how that can actually start to even pull away from who you are as a real person, and what that feels like, and, you know, which one is the real you. and how, you know, especially with influencers and the ones that I've worked with, you know, that they feel like very much like they have to operate in a certain way. You know, they're kind of a little bit a slave to the content. They have to continue on a certain vein that they started maybe like 5 years ago, but actually the person they are now is like completely different. And I think that was a kind of theme that I wanted to explore, like this sense of who, like in a digital world, in an influencer world, who is the real, what is real anyways. And that's why I kind of say like it's more of an embodiment of capitalism, because she's just there to sell clothes, and that's what she struggles with.
So she's actually being, like I say, there's an exploitative aspect to it as well. And yeah, I mean, it's something that you know, content creator is very much a full-time job, and it's a job that's being taken on quite often by teenagers, by children even, and it's something that they are very exposed when they do it, especially if they're, you know, not just talking about, you know, what music they listen to, or you know, what clothes they wear, or, you know, all the sort of influencer side of things, but a lot of them put their real life out there, and like a lot of their real vulnerabilities out there at a very early age. And obviously for some of them it can turn into a hugely profitable thing. You know, you've got this sort of like the Zoe Suggs, who then suddenly have this amazing, you know, trajectory to a very profitable career. But it's also one of those things that we've seen quite a lot of those social media celebrities also, you know, getting cancelled for you know, and there's definitely a sort of very precariousness, that thing. And apart from anything else, like I say, the sheer amount of content they put out, you think that is a full-time job. How much time are you spending offline and as a real person, without having to film everything you're doing?
I think that was part of it, is wanting to kind of channel some of the things that I've seen that are kind of like nuts in a way, where if you see an influencer at work, they're juggling multiple brands, they're like holding different video cameras up, like it's in many ways, there's a maybe darker side to it that I think not many people see perhaps, and they just see more the glamorous side. And I think that's why I wanted to unpick and go a bit more into the psyche of it. And also, unfortunately, you hear a lot of young people saying they want to be an influencer, that's what they want to kind of, that's what they aspire to as a career. And I think I was kind of keen to maybe just look at that a bit more and be like, well, what does that even entail, and like what's the reality of how that might feel. And essentially she's quite lonely, which is really sad.
I think even though you only do it in a very brief way, through the comments that she receives, I think you do characterize very well the sort of people who are feeding off social media celebrities. And like I say, some of them are like gushing and oh my God, and you know, and a very kind of this obsessive fan thing, but others are absolutely abusive and or very callous, and just don't think what they say matters. They can ask very callous comments all the time. And I think you characterize like all that aspect of it really well, even when it's only coming in these short little comment scrolls that you added in. So I think that's really effective, and it does show not only what it's like to be on the side of being the big social media celebrity, but for the people who also are the ones who create the audience for that.
Yeah, and she says at some point, oh, you know, I do exist because I help them feel something in a vapid world, which I think was from the bit that you read out. And yeah, I think she feels like this kind of responsibility to her fans. But then, yeah, you do get this other side of it where you can see that, you know, a lot of the comments she gets is spam, a lot of the DMs she gets is abuse. Like it's not, I guess it's trying to, again, try to show that side of it that maybe on the front of it you don't normally see. So, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess from what I've seen, I don't think there's any like there's no celebrity who is universally loved. There will always be, if there's a hype about anyone, there will be a backlash about anyone as well. So it's a very difficult position to be in. And like I say, especially if it's someone who's a teenager who's got this very fragile, you know, ego and sense of self. I think it's a really worthy area to explore, and I think your story explores it extremely well. Moving on a little bit from Lavender Blue, I just wanted to take the opportunity to say, from what I've read in your biography, you have a novel as well. Family and Company. Listed for the 2019 Dyslexia novel competition, no less. And you're working on a second novel. So we've only got about 5 minutes or so left. So I just wanted to let you dedicate a bit of that time to talking about your other creative projects, because I'm really keen to hear about them.
Yeah, I'm like really knee deep in that second novel now, and it was great to have the accolade from Miss Lexia on the first one. But as I said, taken me a while to get back into creative writing, so it was fab to complete. But I'm sort of eager to get onto this second one. It's operating, I guess, still in like this post-internet kind of area, dystopian tech future. It actually is also tied into the theme of influencers as well. So the protagonist is a photographer who essentially goes around with the influencers, and she works for an agency that helps them improve their status on an app called Ureal. And the world, you see it through her eyes, and it becomes kind of apparent that things have started to really deteriorate in many, many ways, in the way that the app has kind of penetrated all levels of society. And she decides to go and live on a tech-free island and see what that's like with her parents for a bit. And then she has to make a very difficult decision about whether she's going to be part of a movement to kind of take down the social network. So it's a bit of a kind of, I guess, dystopian thriller in a way. Really fun to write. I'm really enjoying writing it, and just trying to keep going, really, because it's something that I want to kind of get finished. So I'm excited to keep working on that one.
It does sound fabulous. It sounds like, you know, I'm very into anything Black Mirror-y. I think you mentioned Black Mirror before, but as much as, you know, technology opens a lot of doors, and it is something that we all embrace and we all do live with, there are these dark tangents you think that it can take, and it's really interesting to sort of have fiction that like either TV or novels that delves into that. So yeah, that sounds really good. That sounds up my street.
Cool.
Right, so thank you so much for joining us, Hannah Ray, and like I say, thank you so much for allowing us to use your story a year after you originally sent it.
Thank
all the work you did on it.
Thank you so much as well, Cal. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you on it, and I'm super stoked to see the anthology out, so congrats.